So welcome everyone. It's just after 12 noon for me. I know we have, I think we have a fairly diverse audience. I was skimming through the names of attendees and recognized a few folks kind of across North America and beyond here. I can't remember if I saw anybody, I know we do have at least 2 or 3 people from overseas, so we have a nice crowd today. So thank you very much for joining our session on rethinking resilience. And see on the screen there, this subtitle is Surviving and Thriving through the uncharted waters of COVID-19 into some very interesting times here in mid-July on the global scale, with the pandemic still looming large and impacting a lot of parts of how we work, how we live, and beyond. Just before we get into the session itself, I have a few quick reminders for everyone in terms of we'll call it Zoom etiquette. I can imagine most of you are more than comfortable, maybe now beyond comfort. I don't know if there's discomfort with Zoom in terms of the Zoom fatigue and that, but just some quick reminders to please keep your audio muted during the main portion of the presentation here, which will be about the first 35 minutes. You'll have ample time when we get into the small breakout rooms to have some conversations. At the same time, I encourage you to keep your video on if your bandwidth allows. It's always nice to see faces and smiles and get a bit of a visual reaction to things across the top of the screen. Speaking of the top of the screen, if you're on a PC, Mac, desktop, laptop, you should be able to slide your mouse up to the top right, and there's some buttons to change the view. They don't appear until you slide your mouse up there, but you can have a speaker view, you can have kind of a side-by-side, you can have a slide view and so forth. If you run into any technical issues, sound, anything like that popping up, you can use the chat window option to message Hillary or Pablo, 2 of our great fielding support folks that are here helping behind the scenes. We'll be using the chat window for a couple of things coming up here. The reactions button, if you haven't found that yet, it's a great way to offer claps, thumbs up, and so forth without interjecting. And if you do have any questions, please do hold tight until we get into the breakout room discussions. You'll find this first piece we're going to zoom through pretty quickly, and then take a much deeper dive into the breakout room discussions. Given our topic as well, I definitely want to acknowledge the sensitivity of our context for this session, and that being the COVID-19 pandemic, and just offer a quick, quiet moment of reflection and tribute. A lot of people are suffering due to the pandemic, health and otherwise, and of course, we're seeing the numbers increase on a unfortunately daily basis in terms of those who have tragically lost loved ones during these past months. One other note I'll just add in as you're taking a quiet moment there is this session is being recorded for posting and viewing on the Fielding Intranet. So it's going to be a private sharing of this main session here. I also want to just qualify that the breakout room discussions will not be recorded. So anything you share in those breakout rooms is basically in the confidence of the individuals sharing that room. With that, I'm going to turn it over to Karen Bogart, PhD. She is the chair of the Board of Trustees with Fielding, and she has some welcoming remarks, and we'll just bring our presenters into the fold here. Karen.
Well, thank you, and thank you for doing this session, and just a shout out to everyone participating today. This is such an important topic because it affects us individually, our families, our neighbors, our communities, our country, the world. I mean, the pandemic has brought forward conflicts in so many ways on an individual, organizational, and political organizational level, and we're dealing with them, and it affects people differently due to economics, where they're located, the infrastructure, the healthcare available to them. So I look forward to this session as a way to personally learn, but also as we think about what fielding can do and what we should be doing in addressing. This is a really important topic. So thanks to everyone participating today. I would love to say that we'll get through this soon. I personally don't believe we will. And the only rainbow, the only positive is that we're learning how to work differently. We're learning that we can have relationships through technology. And I'm hoping that it actually will improve accessibility for a lot of people that have had, specific limitations of a variety of ways. So hopefully some good will come out of it, but this is a very painful time for the world. And again, thank you to the presenters and to everybody engaging today and when you see the recording itself. So thank you.
Great, thanks. Thanks so much, Karen. So you see the presenters listed on the screen there, and I should mention I'm the voice behind the slides here, Trevor Maber, along with Dohrea, Holly, Zieva, Susan, and Eliza. You'll get to hear a bit more from each of them in a few minutes coming up here. And then since we don't have a huge block of time for the discussions, the World Cafe sessions at the end, you will be in breakout rooms with 2 or 3 of the presenters. So you'll have an opportunity to have a bit of a deeper connection and closer piece into that. One thing we want to hear from all of you, and if you were at a fielding session, those of you that have been to fielding sessions in the past, I know there's some people that are attending. This is your first fielding session, and rather than being in Chicago, here we are in our homes and offices and locales on Zoom. Typically in person, there'd be a bit of a warm up, an introduction, a chance for people to discuss at their tables, get to know each other. So the best we can offer here on Zoom is just to ask everyone if you take a quick moment in the chat window, the chat box here in Zoom, and your name will pop up. So you'll see each person's name with their comments. But if you could just put in your location, where you are, feet on the ground, somewhere in the world right now, and a brief thought or comment on what drew you to the session. What brought you to the session and the topic of resilience? We'll give a few moments for people to do a side introduction here in the chat box. And that's for everyone that's attending here. So as the answers are popping in, feel free to skim through the chat window there and just see who you recognize, who's a new face, a new name to you. And I think one of the really good things, and Karen alluded to this, I guess some of the positives coming out of convening in this way is it's a great opportunity, a great way to connect with others, to find people that maybe geographically close to you or have some shared interests and so forth. So please use this chat window and everything popping up and as a resource as we move into things here as well. So as you're continuing your introduction, so I'm going to give us a quick little slide here in terms of the session objectives and what we're hoping to cover in our just under 80 minutes that we have remaining. So we're going to spend a few moments setting the context and the idea of this question of resilience and how it connects into the current circumstances, that being primarily the COVID-19 pandemic, and what's meant by this notion of surviving and thriving. And you saw that in the subtitle and in the advertisements and session information that was shared out. Then we're going to shift gears for our second segment, and that's into creating our frame. And you're going to hear quite briefly, kind of quick little 3-minute snippets, an overview from each of our presenters here on 6 quite diverse perspectives and different ways of looking at this topic of resilience, and then have a chance to spend some time with some of them on a deeper dive in the World Cafe discussions, as I mentioned. And then the last part, which is going to be the bulk of our time together today, and that is into some World Cafe discussions, so in the Zoom breakout rooms, and we'll be looking at how can we co-construct our understanding of this. Our presenters, none of us are appearing here as the gurus or experts of resilience in the midst of a pandemic, tied to our perspectives. I think we're all just trying to make sense, figure this out. And so it'll be an opportunity for all of us to move into some conversation and dialogue around this. And then towards the end, our last round of the World Cafe will be looking at generating insights and how are we going to carry some of this conversation and perspective that we've gained here and as we step into this unknown future. I was in a workshop just actually a couple of days ago, and someone was talking about this idea of hosting or holding space for some of the deep discussions that we need to be having right now, and it's an interesting time to be doing that in this period of isolation and disconnect and being apart from others. And some of you may be familiar with David White. He's a poet. He's actually done a lot of work in organizational realms and contexts. And he's definitely come back into the spotlight over the last few months. I've seen him popping up in a number of different venues and locations, just sharing some of his wisdom and perspective. And so I have a poem here to share with you. And this was something that happened a couple of days ago in the workshop I was in. I thought, no, it's a real great way, I think, just to kind of ease ourselves into the space and start to think about and feel into what we're going to be covering here. So it's a poem, one of his more famous ones, seems to show up a lot of places, called Finisterre. So I'll pop it up on the screen and do a quick narration. I wish I had an Irish accent, just had that way David White does of pulling everyone into his thinking and his experiences, but I'll do my best here. Here we go. So Finisterre by David White. The road in the end, taking the path the sun had taken into the western sea, and the moon rising behind you as you stood where ground turned to ocean. No way to your future now, but the way your shadow could take. Walking before you across water, going where shadows go. No way to make sense of a world that wouldn't let you pass, except to call an end to the way you had come. To take out each frayed letter you had brought, and light their illumined corners, and to read them as they drifted on the late western light. To empty your bags, to sort this and to leave that. To promise what you needed to promise all along, and to abandon the shoes that brought you here, right at the water's edge. Not because you had given up, but because now you would find a different way to tread, and because, through it all, part of you would still walk on, no matter how, over the waves. So hope that resonates with some of you. Definitely take a look at some of his work if you've not seen it before. But just that notion, the way David White's portrayed this in the present times, is we're really into a space of, I think, rethinking and revisiting, reflecting on who we are, how we are, and where we're going next. Speaking of where we're going, setting our context here. So I think we'll just dive into this. I was going to do a quick survey to get a sense of where people are at, but I'll just zip along. Do have another quick survey coming up. So this topic of resilience, first started to really appear in the psychology discipline back in the 1970s and 80s. A lot of work surfacing, research coming out, looking at both scholarship and practice around mental and emotional coping, how that's associated with stress and trauma. And more recently, you've definitely seen, I imagine many of you, how resilience has opened and entered into the mainstream. This growing prevalence of the highly complex, wicked problems we have across some very significant domains, society as a whole, education, ecology, healthcare, economics, and business. We're seeing a lot going on in the space of resilience, and this increased emphasis on personal and professional resilience at the individual level, organizational resilience, and even large system resilience. So professional level, I can speak from being a business school professor. Mindfulness is one of the hottest topics right now in the world of business. If somebody would have told me that a decade ago, I would have thought they were not quite sure what they were talking about, but here we are into that. More direct to home here, and with Fielding back in 2019, Fielding actually released a monograph on the topic of resilience, and we're lucky to have two of the contributors, Eliza and Zieva, here joining us today. So for anyone, I know we have a number of prospective students listening in here. There's a lot of opportunities for you to take your work, to take your interests, your passions, and turn that into publications, put that out into the world. And the fielding monographs are a great way to do that. And obviously, when that monograph came out, I don't think anyone was predicting the space and the world we're into right now. This interest in this topic of resilience has really surged in response to the disruption, the uncertainty we're seeing with the pandemic. Numerous discussions, even around and within fielding. For example, the recent webinar series, you can see a snippet of that on the screen there. I did a quick Google search for the terms resilience and COVID being pretty unique just last night, and 117 million results came back on that. So just stop and digest that for a minute. That 3-4 months ago, 5 months ago, we had no idea what COVID was. It wasn't in our vernacular, and here all of a sudden we have hundreds of millions of results, information, thoughts, web pages, data being generated around that. So we're definitely starting to see some patterns appear and reappear around this topic of resilience. Resilience very much started off in this micro space, so the idea of individual resilience, particularly with the mental, emotional coping. But we're now seeing people thinking and talking and considering resilience in a very macro and in some ways global scale. What does that look like? This surviving and thriving notion is also, the idea of taking resilience from just a space of surviving, how to get through, how to manage, and how can we leverage and use resilience individually, collectively, as entire systems to thrive, to recreate, to rethink, to reimagine, and a lot of great conversations unfolding around that as well. Third thing we want to bring in, and this is an interesting take on resilience, is there's definitely a contextual element to it that we can think about resilience in different ways, whether it's individually or collectively. Some of those domains I mentioned, such as education, healthcare, economics, and so forth. But you're likely also starting to see and feel, even just yourselves, the universality around that. I've been on a number of, I guess I would call global participation types of calls and discussions lately, and people are feeling, seeing, experiencing things in very similar ways, regardless of where they are in the world, the kinds of work they're doing, and so forth. So a lot of commonality across there. And last but not least, with resilience, and this is part of our anchor for today, is that there is an innate element to resilience. There's a lot of theory, for example, attachment theory in the realm domain of psychology that looks at how people have or come equipped with different amounts, different types of resilience. But there's also an individual element in terms of we can build our resilience, we can increase our resilience, build our capacity when it comes to resilience, and we're able to leverage and enhance that resilience as needed. So I'm just going to pause for a quick moment here and ask if any of our other presenters have a quick thought or comment they might want to share around our context here and the resilience frame that we're bringing to this. Just turn on your mic and jump in if you want to.
So resilience for me is really hanging in there and trying to bring joy into a situation. And I'll tell you more about it when I present about wellness and media. And right now, just for everyone, I'm reading the book by Viktor Frankl, Man's Search for Meaning, which is about logos therapy and his Holocaust surviving from more a psychological point of view, because he's a psychiatrist. So just putting that as a possibility, if we are interested in continuing on to study that after the presentation, to consider this book.
Perfect. Thanks, Dohrea.
I've read that book, Dohrea. It's very interesting. But I was just looking, what I wanted to add to this is just looking at the chat box. There are people here from all over, And also some people are interested for themselves, and some people are interested in order to go back to school to teach and things like that. So just when I speak, I like to be aware of who the audience is. And to me, resilience is going through a hard time and coming out as good or better than you did when you went in. And so that's what, when my presentation, that's what I'm looking at. That's what my definition is.
Love that. Any other perspectives, Zieva,
I'll just say
Eliza?
quickly to jump in on what Holly said, was that my perspective will come more from the process between start and finish. So where the resilience lies in the process of going through the hard time or whatever's going on. So.
Love that. Thank you. All right, we'll shift gears now. We're going to start to create our frame for the next while. What you see on the screen there may be familiar to many of you. I actually did a bit of background research. I was curious, what's the story behind the elephant and the blind researchers or blindfolded researchers, and someone somewhere attributed this to a poem by John Godfrey Saxe back in the 1800s called "The Blind Man and the Elephant." And just this idea, as you can see on the screen there, that our topic and context here is so vast and complex that a single lens, a single perspective isn't going to be sufficient to, I think, really grow an appreciation and enhance our understanding of resilience. So what we're going to offer for the next few minutes here, we have 6 perspectives. We're going to start with Holly bringing a perspective on neuroplasticity and change, and providing a quick little brief 3-minute overview just to give you a bit of sense around all the different ways, and these are 6 of countless perspectives or lenses that you could bring to this topic of resilience. And again, you'll have an opportunity to engage in some in-depth conversation with some of the presenters ahead here during the World Cafe portion coming up. So with that, I will jump to our next slide, and Holly, over to you.
All right, so I am a brain researcher. I'm a Fielding alum. I graduated in 2017, and since then, even in Fielding, I was interested in the brain, and now I'm a researcher, so I'm looking at the brain. So my topic is neuroplasticity and change. So first of all, what is neuroplasticity? Neuroplasticity is the ability of your brain to change. Your brain is constantly changing, constantly rewiring itself, whether you are aware of it or not. People used to think that your brain was pretty well set, but we know now that your brain will be different at the end of the day than it was at the beginning. Your brain will be different next week, next year, and you have some control over what your brain will be like. So self-directed neuroplasticity is you taking control of that and purposefully changing your brain, which really is a pretty amazing thing. And so self-directed neuroplasticity is taking control of the fact that your brain does rewire itself and using it to your advantage. So there is I'm from Canada, and there's a Canadian researcher, and some of you I saw in the chat are from Canada as well, so I'm kind of proud of this. But it was Donald Hebb. He said, neurons that fire together, wire together. And what that means is if you think in a certain pathway, a certain habit of thought, a certain pattern, your brain is going to be more likely to go that way in the future. So we can work with that. And if we go back to resilience, to me, it means, as I mentioned, going through a hard time, coming out at the other side, being as good or better than you were going in. This can apply to a person individually or to a society. And I want to put hopefully a positive spin on that. So how do we do that? How do we take control of our own wiring of our brain? Well, I only have 3 minutes, so I have to narrow this down. The first step is to just know that you can. And believe me, please believe me, you can. You can physically change your brain. And well, just have to go with that. You know you can. The second step is to be aware of your thoughts. So for the next little while, however long that is up to you, but so let's say for 2 days, just be aware of the thoughts that you're thinking. Just be aware of it and see that you actually have control. But first of all, just watch how it goes. and see if there's certain things, maybe times of the day when you start feeling negative, or certain environments, certain people, certain whatever. Just be aware of what you're thinking. And the third step is to start to take control of that. Let's say you're getting really worked up about the numbers and the graphs and what's going to happen in the news, and just say, you know what, for 10 minutes, even set your timer if you need to. I am not going to worry about that. I'm going to take a break from all that, or maybe you're writing something and you need a break from that. So just go away and just think about what's going on in your body, and just try to relax yourself and change your physiology. And then just think or write down things that you're grateful for, things that are going well in your world, like your personal world, or even just enjoy that cup of coffee, that piece of chocolate or whatever, but just somehow get a break from that, because you can only think one thing at a time. You can't carry on too many thoughts at once. So you're going to relax your physiology. So that's a helpful skill for the future. And right now, for most of us, we are okay. Right now, we are okay. So tell yourself that and just relax. Now, I don't know what your circumstance is at home. If you have kids at home because they can't go to school, well, this is July, but around here, this happened in March, kids were sent home. So some people didn't have the opportunity to have more time. And so I would say, enjoy the time you have with your kids. But if you do have more time right now because you're sent home from work or whatever, you can use neuroplasticity to make yourself a better version of yourself. The kids these days say level up. So try to level up. I'm trying to become a better writer academically in this time. Maybe you want to learn another language. Maybe you want to just learn to be able to handle stressful situations better. So no matter what it is, and this pandemic will end, no matter what it is, at the end of this, we can come back better and stronger, kind of like a Navy SEAL. Maybe we can handle the next stressful situation a little bit better than we did now. And so that's my topic, neuroplasticity and change. I just want to end with one thing. The only thing you can control is your thoughts. That's the only thing you can control. And your thoughts will take the shape and the patterns in your brain. So in the future, you make your brain, and then your brain makes you. That's it. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Holly. All right, on to Dohrea now. We'll hear from Dohrea on wellness and media.
Yes, fake news, wellness, media. It's like, why does it combine together? It's very interesting. Before I get into it though, another book that I have to plug in because I've been reading a lot, you guys, is I and Thou by Baeyer. And it's actually a very appropriate book right now because, as all things American and probably Canadian, and Trevor and Holly, you can tell me if that's true, we're very divided. And the division is shown in the media, of course. And so the first thing we all have to realize, I think, is that the news and the media is for-profit organizations. They have to make their money, and to make money, they need to compete. That means a lot of noise, enormous amount of noise. And as we know, as scientists, scholars, people who are doing research, it takes a while to accumulate the data from all over the world to actually know what we're dealing with in totality. And before these things started, I actually had my own experience of surviving and trying to thrive. My husband got ill just when the virus started to go crazy in China, and then it came to us 10 minutes from us in Kirkland, Washington. We're so famous. And then started to spread. My husband did not have the COVID, at least we think he did not. He had another very nasty organism, but he was in the hospital for a month, has some lung damage, and we're getting him back together. And the whole time I communicated, of course, with our closest friends. And because we do work in the medical field, and interestingly enough, we produce supplements that are targeting the most difficult to treat chronic illnesses. And as we know, chronic illnesses like diabetes, obesity, and heart disease, including lung, affect people with COVID. And that's the cases that we need to look at and help them survive. And so I had my own calamity about a month and a half before everyone else got into their calamity. And I remember discussing with my friends, who many of them are doctors, that we wonder if this is going to spread, if this is really going to become a pandemic. The WHO organization, World Health Organization, has been talking about pandemics for a very long time. We created the perfect situation for it, with very bad climate, environment that is full of chemicals, horrific food supply system that is pumping up all the wrong foods. And of course, if you think about it, the media is competing for your attention with all sorts of intense articles that depress the heck out of us. And then if they say to the big corporation or small ones that want to advertise, hey, we have a lot of people that are coming into our sites, then they get more money for more commercials. It's one of those deals. And so they have to hype up these types of articles to make us want to read more. And of course, the more we read, the more depressed we are. And so one of the things that my husband and I learned to do earlier, and something we've discussed with all the doctors that we talk to and come alongside to help them with the most difficult to treat conditions and their patients, is that they need to look into the medical journals and into the WHO organization. They need to get their stats elsewhere and not from the media, like the WHO has it consistently. If you have to know really the numbers, then Johns Hopkins Medical University has some very reliable numbers. But, and I do check the media. I have to, because we need to stay on top of it, because we are in the education business and in helping for medical situations that are popping left and right all the time, that are becoming more and more bizarre, because there are so many different symptoms that we are dealing with. And so survival and maintaining our resilience and actually even thriving in this atmosphere is exactly what Sean and I, my husband and I, decided we're going to do in the ICU before any of this started. And we thought to ourselves that, you know what, life is too short. That was on the day the doctor told us that he may die, and that we need to bring back joy into the center of our life. That if something does not produce joy, we need to look at it, evaluate it, and think through the process of why is this not something that has joy in it. We forget about joy in life. And obviously not everything brings joy, and we have so many challenges. We are face to face with COVID every day because we work with doctors, but with it, we exercise joy. And that's the key that I'm bringing to you today, and we can talk more about it in our breakout room. So you guys,
Beautiful.
That's it.
Thanks so much, Dohrea. On to our third perspective now. This is from Susan, and she's going to bring a bit on working and living virtually.
Hi, everyone. I'm Susan Miele. I am graduated from Fielding in 2017 with this Trevor, Dory, Holly, and a couple of others. So great group that we had together for the entire ride of our dissertation, and have been together since. So it's been fantastic. I live and work in Boston, and I have worked in human resources as a chief people officer for many, many years. I've been in HR for over 30 years, and now lead HR for a company called Foundation Medicine. Foundation Medicine is a cancer diagnostics firm, so we are an essential business. And my perspective these last 5 months and what I am bringing to today's conversation is really around organizational resilience. And of course, with organizational resilience becomes the resilience of the people within the organization and the culture. And I think when I think about it, it is that real spectrum of surviving and thriving. So the continuum that we've been on in this journey since we sent over 1,000 people home to work remotely in March, keeping 500 people on site to continue to manage the labs on behalf of late-stage metastatic cancer patients is a huge continuum. And having had 30 plus years at this, to see the complexity of the decisions that have had to be made from an organization, I don't think I've ever seen anything as challenging as this, and of course, completely unknown. And the last thing that was this challenging was 9/11, and I have to say that seems like a small little blip in comparison to this last 5 months, and the profound and changes that we're not even sort of clear what they'll be, right? And the one I always tell my daughter, because she wasn't born, or she was born, but she was only 18 months old, is, you know, used to be able to walk up to an airplane and just get on. Like, I mean, a lot of people don't even know that, who were born post that. It was like so easy to travel, like getting on a city bus. So what are the changes that COVID is going to bring forever to people's lives? And then how does that translate into the workplace? And how do we accommodate that huge continuum of couple things, those essential workers that are on site, the folks that aren't coming back, and we made a decision today that we will send no non-essential workers back for the rest of this calendar year. And then furthermore, how do we accommodate the number of people who are using this as in such a positive way as Dory and Holly framed, in terms of thriving and recreating and imagining, to the other end of the continuum where it's really just survival. You have 2 small kids at home, you're a single parent, you have to homeschool, you're expected to work 40 hours a week or more. We have a very demanding business, as just by the very nature of what we do. So it's, you know, paradox all the way around. So I look forward to hearing your views when we break out into the small groups. So thank you. It's a pleasure to be here.
Thank you so much, Susan. All right, you're going to hear a tiny bit more from myself, Trevor, here. I should mention I'm a graduate from the relatively new, in the grand scheme of fielding, organizational development and change PhD, and completed that back in 2018. So as a university professor, this topic you see here on the screen is very near and dear to me and my students, in terms of how education and learning has been evolving and I think somewhat revolutionized as a result of the pandemic. One of the first areas I think, you know, many people can see was impacted by the pandemic was education. Seemingly overnight, there were billions of students around the globe that were facing school closures. In early April, UNESCO, who's been tracking the impact of the pandemic on education, they identified in early April, so you know, right when the pandemic had really started to show up on a global basis, 194 countries that had countrywide closures, and that was affecting over, think about this for a second, 1.5 billion primary and secondary students. So that was over 90% of the total enrolled learners. As of today, they have a very neat little sliding chart. I'll share the link with you, an interactive graph. There's still 109 countries that have countrywide closures. That's still 1 billion students out of school right now. And that's over 60% of the, I guess, call it the primary, secondary student base around the world. There's not a lot of global data yet that I was able to uncover on the post-secondary side. There seems to be a lot of things happening by region, by nation. Here in Canada, where I'm based, there's a Statistics Canada survey in mid-May, and they found 25% of post-secondary students had some courses canceled or postponed due to the pandemic. Something very interesting that came out of that survey as well is that that cancellation number jumped to 50% for students that were in programs tied to services and trades. If you think about the logic rationale there, those have a pretty heavy in-person training or education component. Another kind of scary stat around that is 10% of students that did move online found they were unable to complete the requirements around the course. They had to drop out of the course, had issues there with engaging with the course, or maybe they were back in a home country, a home location where the internet connectivity and that was not great. I think a good news piece out of all this is doctoral learning has been shown to be the least affected. If you think about the nature of doctoral learning, it's a very individualized, kind of a solo journey. I think fielding in particular for those prospective students coming on board is very well positioned for the environment circumstances we're into, being a virtual distance-based self-directed program. So I'll post a couple of those links after I'm through my piece here. I think, when it comes to resilience, I want to point out no part of this system in terms of education and learning has been untouched. Students and parents, Susan alluded to a bit of that and the pressures and trials, tribulations around that. Teachers and faculty, a lot of pressure, strain there in terms of the workload. Shifting to the online environment, the idea of how to manage classrooms virtually, and I think even if the pandemic starts to subside somewhat, and we're back to the classroom, how do you manage social distancing? I'm just thinking about one of my cousins that teaches in kindergarten. Like, where do you begin with a bunch of kindergartners and try and keep them socially distant? And I think even the administration institutions themselves are really struggling and challenged by the pandemic, and is a big question in terms of resilience for them when it comes to the financial aspect and how the pandemic is impacting institutions, schools, school systems, school boards, financially, operational considerations. Lots of interdependencies. Some of the things my students have brought up for me, and this is teaching at the university undergrad level, summer employment opportunities are limited for them, so they're having additional financial burdens that may impact the enrollment. So there's a lot of cascading kind of snowballing effects out of this. So just to start to wrap up here, when it comes to resilience, thinking about the normal reality, the old normal of education, schools, universities, institutions, there was a lot of underlying premise or associated with that that's a place of safety, stability, predictability, and an opportunity to bond, socially connect. And I think there's a lot of concerns, a lot of thinking, literature, research coming out now around the long-term mental health impact of not having that anymore. Regardless, right from the kindergarten level all the way up to graduate, postgraduate studies, what does that mean? I think there's some big questions coming tied to resilience around the plans to return to the classroom in the fall for those that are on that calendar cycle, which is a number of Western nations. What does this mean for safety? What does it mean for the idea of stability if they end up having to close down schools again? International students are either unable or unwilling to travel right now, so some long-term impacts there. And the last couple of points I have for you is around the micro resilience piece. So on an individual basis, I think the question of how we navigate this uncertainty when it comes to our education and learning, regardless of who we are, where we are, and how that's happening, there's a huge added emotional, psychological, cognitive load with that. So I've had students give me feedback that learning online is actually more demanding. It seems to be more taxing. It's harder to do. They don't feel as happy. They don't feel as joyful as Dohrea mentioned. And last, on the macro perspective, macro resilience is big questions being asked now if and how education needs to evolve and look differently. I think on the technology side, we're seeing some really interesting kind of shoehorning of classroom education into the online realm, but what else could come out of that beyond the tech question? And what is learning in today's society, and how might that tie to the future of work and how the pandemic's going to shift that as well? So I'll leave it at that, and we have two last perspectives coming up here. Over to you, Zieva.
Thank you to all my young colleagues. I'm Zieva Konvisser. I graduated from HOD in 2006, and I've been a fellow for the Institute of Social Innovation since day one, or before it even started. I personally suffered the loss of at least 30 family members who remained in Vilna, Lithuania during the Holocaust.
Sorry about that.
The few who survived inspired me to study the human impact of traumatic events, which can be described as a struggle and often a battle with highly challenging life circumstances, and how such survivors have been able to not only bounce back, as in resilience, but as Holly also said, but also move forward from and live next to or alongside the trauma, as in post-traumatic growth. My passion has been to give voice to survivors of the Holocaust and other genocides, as well as survivors of terrorism, as I did for my doctoral dissertation in 2006 and my subsequent book in 2014, Living Beyond Terrorism, Israeli Stories of Hope and Healing. And as well, those whose lives have been shattered by wrongful convictions. While death and distress are all too present in these stories, each one of them also emphasizes that hope and meaning can be found after struggling with and surviving any life crisis. Like the fragile cyclamen flower pushing up through the crack in the hard stone wall on the cover of my book, symbolizing rebirth and new growth. An image based on a photograph that I took at the site of a spontaneous memorial to a deadly suicide bombing. Or like the trees that bend or change shape to accommodate the wind, many survivors of trauma are able to recover or even reconfigure their lives, and even if destroyed, still have the capacity to nourish new growth. As one Israeli bereaved mother, Sherry Mandel, describes her journey in her aptly named book, The Road to Resilience, From Chaos to Celebration. Resilience is not overcoming, it's becoming more, becoming our fullest and deepest selves as a result of adversity. What's important for all of these survivors is recognizing the possibilities. I think somebody else also talked about it, is understanding what's possible as portrayed in these remaining images. There's the mountain climbers for whom the struggle itself is the calling, not reaching the goal, but the struggle itself. The butterfly who struggles to break out of its cocoon, thereby strengthening its wings so it can fly. And the broken pottery that has been repaired with gold to emphasize its imperfections instead of hiding or disguising them, thereby revitalizing it with new life and making the repaired pieces even more beautiful than the original. My mother's cousin lived through the Vilna ghetto and the concentration camps and came out believing that he was spared in order to make a difference. Out of his struggle came a survivor's love and life and the embodiment of what he's called Holocaust survivors and their descendants who can transform the most fragile souls into individuals stronger than steel. In the face of overwhelming disaster, Isaac and the other survivors discovered for themselves that the meaning does not lie in the disaster, but in the way they can respond to the disaster. As pointed out previously, Viktor Frankl, the noted neurologist, psychiatrist, and Holocaust survivor, learned from his experiences, as he wrote in his autobiographical Man's Search for Meaning, when we no longer are able to change a situation, we are challenged to change ourselves. Likewise, as we all experience this pandemic or a crisis to body, mind, and spirit, each one of us is challenged to think about how we might move forward alongside our feelings of grief, pain, and helplessness, and how we might create something more beautiful, more meaningful from the chaos of our lives.
Beautiful. Thank you, Zieva. Our final perspective to share here is from Eliza on community resilience. So over to you,
Yes.
Eliza.
All right, thank you. So I'm a current student in the PhD program, Organizational Development Change, also an alumna of the ABC program, the coaching program. And I'm an arts-based researcher. And as Trevor had mentioned, Zieva and I had worked on the resilience monograph. And my chapter was a visual ethnography of, or I was part of the chapter. It wasn't the full chapter, but so it was a visual ethnography of the Boyle Heights neighborhood of LA. And so I decided to pivot for this presentation today to provide an arts-based context. So looking at surviving and thriving resilience at and coping during COVID, where I live in Ottawa, Canada. So as you can see, there's a banner thanking essential workers. There's someone who's attached this grand sign with a box of chalk saying, hey, come and draw something on the sidewalk and right here, or take it home and create some art at your own house. And something whimsical was, you know, the toilet paper roll because of all the hoarding that went on. Lots of people in their homes or apartments on the main level put art in their windows, so you can see the rainbow and Tigger and Pooh Bear sitting underneath the rainbow. And so then, and so there's just all sorts of different art. Some of it you can see wash your hands. It's been photocopied, it's been taped to a post. There's an artist named COVID Shark who's appeared, so we have a bit of a Bansky situation. Everybody's trying to figure out who this is. Obviously, and someone actually painted their fence, thanking frontline workers. And you can see our Parliament building on the left-hand side and on the right-hand side, you know, giving them some inspiration to, you know, this too shall pass. And so these have appeared almost overnight. Ottawa's not usually, doesn't usually have art everywhere. We have some murals, we have sometimes you'll see signs on phone posts or light standards, but this is different. This is coping in Ottawa. So this slide, oh, I think we skipped one.
I think we may have skipped one there. I'll see if I can get us to see if I can click. Oh yeah, it's just going to start the time over again. Sorry about that, Eliza.
That's okay, no worries. So Black Lives Matter. So after the death of George Floyd, we had a march, like a demonstration, and a lot more art appeared. So the conversation switched, and the art switched more to defunding the police, ensuring that our murals around town actually had people of color in them, and the artists who are painting the murals are actually people of color. So that was a big switch that's happened. There's two big murals. One is permanent, it's on the side of a building. The other is you can see on your screen right now, the top right. That's a fenced sort of a fence for there's an apartment building being built there, so it's a construction site, and there's this, and it's very long. I couldn't get a full picture on there, but things are changing. So lots of messages on rocks too appeared everywhere. Thanking you know, frontline workers, and again with Black Lives Matter, and you just find them almost anywhere taking a walk in the residential neighborhoods and downtown, which seems to be very, it's a change. And it seems to, just knowing the city and the people in it, I feel that this is coping. And as an arts-based researcher, this is, you look at visual art as data. It doesn't have to be the only data, but it's not just to illustrate a point, or art's not used just to illustrate a point, but to actually be data. So yeah, so conversations are changing at the municipal level even, and two of the slides have kind of, you can see part of it. Restaurants were boarded up, the glass was boarded up so that right when everybody went into lockdown. And so there's a lot of art there that's temporary. And I'm not sure what my time is, because
Yeah.
I was going to rely on the,
The slides,
on the slides to tell me that. But so yeah, some whimsy, some hope, some changes, some institutional changes. Murals to appear in Ottawa takes a lot of paperwork and a lot of convincing at the municipal level. So for a permanent mural to appear, you know, things are changing. And I just, my main point is that you can look at art in a community, public art, and see how at a community level, obviously there's individual suffering, there's individual issues, but the art can tell you sort of as where some of the inspiration and the hope is coming from. It's coming from the art.
Love that. Thank you so much, Eliza. And I apologize. Something we had the slides timed out, so we carry through, and we weren't able to get there. I did put a message in the chat that we'll get a recording of the slides appearing so that everyone can appreciate the visuals, because I think it's just stunning to see what you had to offer here. Well, thank you to all our presenters here. We're going to shift into the last segment for our final half hour here together. And this is where everyone gets to dive into the conversation in much greater depth. So we're going to shift into a World Cafe for the remainder of the session. And a little fielding lore that some of you may not realize, Juanita Brown is actually a PhD alum of Fielding. The creator, co-creator of the World Cafe, and her dissertation a few moons ago was part of the foundation for the World Cafe practices and that. If you're not familiar with the World Cafe, haven't come across this before, you'll come to a quick understanding of what's involved here, and you can see a visual representation of the World Cafe on the screen. It's basically comes down to being a process for generative dialogue and the sharing of ideas. So the cafe concept is, if we were doing this in person, if we would have been in Chicago, we'd have people around tables, and you can envision a Parisian cafe, if you like, and just having some open conversation, dialogue. There's no agenda, nobody's in charge. It's just a free-flowing, open conversation. So you're going to be in a virtual table for a bit of time coming up here with one of the 6 of us as your table host. Have an opportunity to move between tables after about 10 minutes, and that'll be completely random. Unfortunately, Zoom doesn't give us enough horsepower here to let people choose. So you're going to be just slotted into one of the tables here. A chance for you to turn on your mic, dive into the conversation. There's going to be the 6 tables, and I think we're looking at about 10-minute rounds of conversation. We're going to have 2 10-minute rounds in the time we have here. We're going to have one kind of appendage to that last 10-minute round just for a couple of minutes to start to come up with generating some of the insights collectively. So you'll stay in that same room. You'll have a chance to generate some of the perspective that will come back to the main room here. So I have a question for you of the I guess kind of compiling and coalescing what's been going on here. And with your room host, who's going to be one of the 6 presenters, you'll see it in the chat box here, and also have another spot that this question will show up for you. So for these 10 minutes, delving into what are you noticing most right now when it comes to resilience. So that chat window is going to carry over with each of you to the breakout room. So, so that question will appear for you there. And one, I guess, kind of caution I'd like to offer is avoid problem solving your solutions. This is just, as you can see in the diagram on the screen there, you're listening to understand, linking and connecting ideas, an opportunity to slow down and bring a bit of reflection into all of this. So this is a very precious time I think we have here this last half hour to deepen our collective consciousness, try and make some more sense of what we're observing, reflecting, experiencing, both within the last hour here together and beyond when it comes to the pandemic. And the last little piece I have for you, and this is another link I'll post into the chat windows. If you have a browser tab that you can open, if you have two screens, this works beautifully. This is a virtual tablecloth. So it's a series of Google Slides. There's one slide for each of the breakout rooms, for each of the discussions. And part of what happens with the World Cafe is everyone's encouraged to, take notes, jot in reflections and so forth. So use that virtual tablecloth during the 10 minutes ahead to jot down your thoughts. Someone else is speaking, is there something there? That tablecloth, it really becomes the thread we're weaving across the conversation. So that tablecloth will actually be there for both rounds of the conversation. You don't need to do anything to join your breakout room or come back to this main room. Zoom's going to look after all that for us. So that's all set up. So you'll be off to the discussion here in a moment. And if you have any questions, be sure to ask your table host, your presenter that's in your room with you. So we'll leave it at that, and we'll see you in the breakout rooms. And back here in about 10 minutes, we'll reconfigure and then go to our final breakout room. Welcome back, everyone. So we're going to do one more round. That 10 minutes probably zipped by. We were into some good conversation, dialogue in our room. So that's the problem with these World Cafes, whether it's virtual, in person. There's just never, ever, ever enough time. So,
Trevor, how do we add to this wall thing?
Yeah, so if you click that link that's in the chat, it starts with, I think, Google. It's a Google link, and it's kind of a longer one. That'll open up a browser window, and then right in there, you or somebody in your group should be able to jot some notes in there. So you just go and find your slide that has you in there. So as I'm setting up the rooms here again for our last round, I'd be curious to hear from any of our other presenters, just a quick little 30-second snippet. What was going on in your room? What was sparking? Just in case people are missing out on your room. Anyone like to jump in?
I will real quick, Trevor. We had I felt like a 2-minute conversation, not a 10-minute conversation, just about sort of the different perspectives that we're all feeling, from acceptance to denial to avoidance to, so just more around, how are we feeling? What are we noticing? How are we showing up as it relates to the current environment and the various levels of resilience associated almost day by day.
Interesting.
And with my group, we talked about there's 5 of us. We had very different perspectives, and it has to do with the world that person lives in. And some people were finding that I guess a way to cope is to go through the rough time, but then to really step back. And when you're home, and when you're at work, someone's daughter works in emergency room medicine, and she is an example of resilience, because when she comes home, she's there with her kids, and they're 4 of her kids. So, and then we had someone from another part of the world altogether. So we're just hearing very different stories, and it's very interesting, and everyone participated, and that's really good too.
So I had an interesting conversation with Tracy. It was just ended up with the 2 of us in the room. We went from 4 to 3 to just the 2 of us. So, and so we had this great conversation about the role of art in activism and the role of art after disaster.
So for this next round, it's going to be a combo discussion. We're down to about our last 15 minutes here. So for the next 10 minutes, about half the time, 5-6 minutes. Now that you have a sense of the World Cafe, you'll be hopefully with somebody else. If you're back in the same room, that was just by chance. And then for the second half of the 10 minutes, shifting gears into one other question that I'm going to pop in here, and this is starting to, generate the insights. And I think, don't feel like, wow, in 5 minutes we're going to generate the insights and that's the end of it, because this is definitely something we want, people to carry away. So for the first 5 minutes, hang on to that "what are you noticing" question and spend a bit of time, and you can jump to the appropriate tablecloth there. And then you'll see there's a second tablecloth if you want to take any notes, and this is the how question. How can we start to build our resilience individually, collectively, as we move into this unknown future? So a bit of a combo approach for this last round here. Then we'll come back and we'll have the presenters just share a real quick wrap up. We might stretch 3 or 4 minutes over. Anyone that wants to stick around, then we'll be tying off our time here. So here we go into our next batch of breakout rooms. See everyone in there. Wow, great to see all the faces on the screen here. I've stopped the slide share, so hopefully you're seeing everyone. Thank you so much for, can you believe that was 89 minutes? I'm not sure how many seconds we had together here. Real quick, just a sentence or two just to hear from each of our presenters, and I'm okay to stick around for 5 or 10 minutes if anyone else wants to have a little bit of a further debrief or comments from our attendees. But we'll start with Holly, 1 or 2 sentences, what you saw across your conversations, what was sparking all over the place there.
Okay, I actually have tears in my eyes because I don't know why. It was genuine conversation, and we started with COVID. We started talking about Black Lives Matter, which happened in the midst of all this, and people, I think, are speaking genuinely and openly and honestly, and there is an underlying sense of hope that going through a rough time, we can come out individually and collectively better. We really can, and that's why I think I have a tear. For me.
Nice. Dohrea, any? Oh, I see Dohrea just plopping back down. Quick closing thought or two.
We have a blast. What can I say? It's so fabulous to hear all these different experiences and what we're all doing to look for the future. And we are thinking about the future, and in our group we decided, the heck with it, we're going for it.
Love it. Love it. Susan, how about your room?
Oh, I felt like we just got going, it's just like the live sessions, you never quite have enough time. So again, we were just talking about the range of where we each are on the continuum of resiliency and how to think about the thriving in this time. And Connie's daughter being a great example of thriving during a really difficult time as an emergency room nurse. So great story and great sign of how we could all learn a little bit from that.
And how about Zieva? What's 1 or 2 quick thoughts from your room?
Well, how quickly we can learn about each other and ourselves, and taking that, how we can build upon that for our future, and that to move forward with what we have available. And we all have something within us, so it's been a wonderful way to get to know each other and ourselves. Thank you.
Eliza.
Okay, so we started off with talking about how, so some of the ways that we could, that we've been coping, how much self-talk we've had, what type of self-talk, where the agency lies in resilience amongst ourselves, and then we sort of morphed into our go-to places, where to spark joy. And we were just starting to talk about nature, how nature is very important, and also community. And even though with social distancing and lockdowns and things like that, that there's still these really powerful community get-togethers and the ability to meet up with people, and you just have to be more creative. Yeah.
Love that. And from my room, the education and learning, I think the first couple of rounds of conversation, there was a sense of we can't even get to the survive or the thrive space. We're still in survive, and there's, it's like the dam's about to burst, and we're all sticking our fingers in. Please, 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 don't break open. But into the last part of the conversation, I think we really also similarly start to shift our perspectives on just the resilience and the way people are finding their way through this, and being able to create solutions on the fly. And I think just the human innate sense of we got to find a way through this. So that's exactly what we're doing. We're 3 minutes over, so I want to respect time here, but I just want to say thank you to everyone for being here. I don't think I can't remember if Hillary set the chat to be able to save, but unfortunately we can't, I don't think, save the chat, but we will share the recording link, and I'll double check with the presenters on the slides. I don't think we'll have any issues sharing the slide deck out to everyone that attended, but thank you very much for all of your time and contribution here. I'm good to stick around for about 5 minutes, and if anyone from the attendees audience here has any thoughts they'd like to offer into the room, please do, and otherwise enjoy the rest of virtual summer session 2020 here with Fielding.